I wanted to title the program today Honor the Republic, Honoring the Republic. And I have Harley here from Germany. Harley, you there?
Yes, I'm here.
All right, there we go. All right, I think I was expecting more news. I guess we are ready to go. Good morning, sir. I see that the sovereign nation of Germany is still standing despite um, crossing the red line several times. Maybe we can get in. Maybe we can get into a little bit about the Ukraine Iran thing. But what I really want to do is because the fourth, I wasn't really able to do the radio show I wanted to do. I thought maybe we could spend a little bit of time on this idea that the Fourth of July is just a little bit more than Thomas Jefferson getting a little buzz to write down a document when, of course, he was representing a group of several people. He was kind of the scribe. But it goes back several hundred years before 1776, the concepts, the ideas that came forth, where the whole idea of a group of people being governed by their consent as opposed to some autocratic rule by a monarch. So let's spend a little bit of time with that.
Well, that's a good idea because I think we really do have to honor the tradition of our republic, which is being destroyed increasingly in recent years with this idea of the unipolar superpower. And people, when they talk about making America great again, some people mean by that what you and I will talk about, namely how a republic functions to put the power in the hands of the people. The people are the sovereigns. As it says in the Declaration, governments are instituted among men with the consent of the governed. But when you look at what we're doing with our policy today, how many people have consented to the idea of permanent wars paid for by American tax dollars? Killing children in Palestine with American tax dollars, shutting down real science and technology, and instead substituting phony science like the green policy. So if this is with the consent of the governed have lost their minds. But I believe that, and I'm sure you do too, that people don't support these kinds of ideas, but they become cynical because they've seen that the power rests not in the hands of the people or in the Congress even, but in the hands of billionaires and the Epstein class and corporate cartels.
Well, exactly. And when you see King Charles come here and get the reception that he does, and you see Bibi Netanyahu come before Congress and getting the reception that he does, and the influence of APAC, and coupled with the staggering level of ignorance that now exists in Generation Z and the millennials and everybody else regarding the foundation of this country and what it took to have this country. I don't know. I wake up every morning very objective, very happy, ready to go, ready to slay the dragon. And it just, I kind of wonder how much longer this republic can last.
Well, it's a very clever dragon we're fighting because what it figured is that the best way to maintain full control is to pervert the thinking process of the governed. That if you can convince the people that are the so-called sovereign power, the governed, that there's nothing they can do to change the policy, that we're always going to be in a state of war, that we're always going to have less than we need, we're always going to have greed and corruption. If you get people convinced of that, then they'll end up giving their consent to that because they don't think it's worth fighting. And this is where I think it's important to give a real call out to those Americans who are the patriots, who have the guts to fight for the bold measures needed to bring us back to the best tradition, which doesn't mean we do the same thing we did 50 years ago or 100 years ago, but that we break out of the axiomatic framework that's put a chain around our mind. And that's sometimes very hard to do. People oftentimes find that they're stuck with a certain way of thinking, and breaking out of that is hard to do. But with voices like yours, who have consistently fought against the consensus of the mainstream, the work over the many, many decades of Lyndon LaRouche and the Schiller Institute, and handfuls of fighters like Thomas Massey or Marjorie Taylor Greene or Tucker Carlson, the potential to break away those chains and get back to thinking again. I think, Jack, the main thing is people have to learn to think critically and recognize that their ability to think is what will make the difference.
But how do you get a population that was raised on knee-jerk reactions and axiomatic phrases to actually sit down with the TV off, open up a couple of books, or maybe go to a couple of very informative websites and actually learn how to think? What is it that stimulates us? I remember back to my physics teacher in my senior year in high school, and the most common comment out of his mouth every time we would do some experiments is he would look at us and he would say, "So what do you think about this? What do you think happened here? What do you think is going on?" And we'd have to sit there, and we couldn't leave the room until we told him what we thought was going on. And maybe that's where some of this comes from, is back to where I was actually stimulated at some point to sit there and actually analyze what's going on, rather than some kind of an answer that would be funny or something that would be accepted by my peers or whatever else, but to sit there and actually, well, gosh, Mr. Tarleton, it looks like this. And then he would, all right, tell me more.
You're onto something there, Jack, because the way people learn, and the way they think they learn, is either through their senses, what they see, or by stringing together a set of facts. But if you understand this principle of axioms embedded in a higher truth, you realize that what you may see now is a reflection of something which actually is a higher level dynamic process, which you can't see the process, but you can only see the momentary results. And the way to challenge that, you need teachers or speakers who present paradoxes. Who say, okay, if we think A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. What if A doesn't equal C in the real world? And get people to, just as an example, we were told that the Iranian government would collapse in 1 or 2 days if they were smashed by air power, bombs, and sanctions and embargo and everything else. Now, what was it the people who said that missed? They missed the fact that Iran is not like our country, that they believed the story that all Iranians are enslaved by a crazy class of Islamic fundamentalists. And look, there are aspects of that are a problem. There are parts of Iran which are backward, especially rural areas. But on a whole, the Iranian population has a relatively high level of education, and it has a sense of identity that goes back thousands of years. And if you don't understand that, you won't understand why 6 to 7 million people turned out at the funeral yesterday of the Grand Ayatollah. And so you'll believe it when Rubio comes out and says they'll fold in a day, or when Hegseth says we're not going to negotiate, we're going to bomb. So which is the barbaric civilization, the civilization that says we're going to bomb you into the Stone Age to get you to accept that your government's no good, or the one that sits down and actually negotiates? And reality is the best way to use paradox to break the way people think. And just one simple example, again using the Iran case. We had this agreement that was negotiated by the team around Obama. Now, you and I both know that Obama is a phony who was basically ruling on behalf of the same corrupt interests that represent the Bush faction, the Clinton networks. They're all run from the top by a bunch of greedy, corrupt bankers. But what they did in the negotiations was they appealed to the Iranians that their future is that it's okay for them to want nuclear power for energy, but not for weapons. And what happened? The Iranians agreed to that. They in fact, the grand leader issued a fatwa, a religious order, saying Iran could not develop nuclear weapons because it goes against Islam. Now, obviously, you and I come back from the Reagan era, which said trust but verify. So we send people in to verify it, and what do they keep reporting back?
No weapons.
Iran is sticking to the agreement.
Yep.
Why didn't we believe that?
Well, we don't want to believe it. We have to have a boogeyman. What's left after all the other boogeymen we got rid of in that part of the world? The only thing that is stopping the further advance of Israel is Iran. So we're going to have all of the press, all of the editorials, all of the podcasts that are oriented in that direction to tell us how archaic, how medieval these people are in their government and their worship, and every other Islamic male is marrying a 12-year-old girl, and that these people hate America. And every time they get together, they, shouting death to America, death to America. Well, after what we did to them in the Iran-Iraq war, I'm not surprised they say those kinds of things. However, that is the standard understanding of Iran by the average standard American, that these people are backward, they're medieval, they don't know right from wrong, and that they completely are locked into some kind of a hold on, everybody. There you are. Hold on. There you are. I got you.
Okay.
Anyway, what I was saying there is that we've got this idea that it's a completely backward country, and they are fomenting developing nuclear devices to not just destroy Israel, but to destroy Washington and Philadelphia and Baltimore and New York City and Miami and everything else. And this is the average image. I know this because I have patients I talk to who do not listen to my radio show, but have this idea that if we could just get rid of Iran, then there would be peace in Southwest Asia.
Yeah. Well, and it's the same thing that when you see something that's different from what you know, and you become suspicious and frightened of it. Instead of building a defense around you, a wall around you, or a wall around them, how about talking? How about really negotiating? And we used to have a split in the State Department between, on the one hand, the Rockefeller, Rothschild networks that were part of the grand design of the Great Reset. But we also had diplomats who came up through military and intelligence who understood that if you negotiate in good faith, you might get solutions.
Well, we kill their negotiators, Harley. We bomb their negotiators in the middle of negotiations.
Right.
So these 6 to 7 million Iranians that were at the memorial for the Khamenei, I really thought, boy, there's going to be a couple of drones showing up in the middle of these crowds that we sent in there, or that Israel sent in there, because anytime we can get a few of them together in moments like this, we bomb them. I don't. Maybe I'm being a little too cynical, But you look at when the negotiators actually sat down in good faith with the West, primarily the United States and Israel. What happened to them?
They got killed.
They got killed.
Yeah.
So
And
when you're
not only did they get killed, but we said that was a good thing.
yeah,
Hegseth said, we don't negotiate, we bomb.
yeah,
Now, that's the kind of bullying mentality of weakness that we should recognize why the Founding Fathers decided to rebel against the British Empire. For precisely the treatment that the British Empire gave the American colonies. That today, the American corporate military establishment gives to the rest of the world. And why should we be surprised if there's a rebellion against that? And why does that mean that the rebellion is a bunch of bad guys, communists, anarchists, and killers? Maybe they're people who want to do something better for their own nation. And we don't have the kind of bigness of heart, the generosity in our political leadership today that we have had at times in the past. And that's something that's a very bad sign for the United States. And by the way, I agree with you sometimes what you just said about being cynical about the possibility of getting that back. But how do you get it back? Each of us has to demonstrate that in our life. We have to show that kind of magnanimous love of mankind, which doesn't mean you surrender and you give up your principles. It means you fight for your principles with others, but you fight with ideas first before you go in with bombs and missiles.
So you're not necessarily on the aggressor side. You may have to be on the defensive side if the negotiations don't take place, but you at least sit down and talk first. And I would be hopeful in an environment where you didn't have to worry about a drone flying in through the window in the meeting in which you're meeting.
Of course. There was I saw someone yesterday from, I think, an intelligence committee guy who said it was totally justified for us to blow up the old regime. And what was interesting is, this British guy who's a commentator, his name's escaping me right now, Alistair Crook.
Yeah.
He just buried his head in his hands and he said, how did we become so immoral that we would tolerate something like that?
Yeah.
And if you go back and look over the years, look at what the United States has done. Now, does the average American know that each of these wars, going back to Vietnam and the Iraq, the invasion we did of Kuwait to get rid of Iraq, Libya, the U.S. policy in Ukraine and Afghanistan, do people know that this was done to protect a collapsing dollar system so that the billionaires can continue to collect their money while we pay out through the nose? People complain, for example, about our tax dollars, but do they ever really look at where they're going and who's making the policy and what could be different? And, I know from the discussions you and I have had now for 25, 30 years maybe, that we bring this up all the time, and yet we still get people who call in and say, well, we're just spending too much money. Well, we are spending too much money in wrong places, but we're not producing enough. There's the other side of this that people just don't see.
Well, what are we producing? Now that you brought that up, what are we producing here? We're totally dependent now on what comes out of the Gulf of Hormuz as far as fertilizer is concerned, as far as helium is concerned, as far as natural gas is concerned, and oil being able to reach nations that need to have a productive capability to buy the products that we make that are being held up or blockaded because they're friends with us. I mean, what are we producing besides the ugly American? What are we actually producing? Help me with that, Paulie.
Well, some of what's being produced in other parts of the world are still produced in the United States. But it costs more now in the United States because we have inefficient energy, we have inefficient infrastructure and transportation, and on top of that, we've become totally dependent on a global supply chain, which now that we've seen for the second time in less than a decade, can be easily disrupted. We saw it during the COVID situation, and now we see it again. Why did we become so dependent on the supply chain, especially from China? And it was because we had a bunch of billionaires who came up with this idea that the way to get rich is to ship our industry to other countries, to outsource it, where we get cheap labor and where we lay off our own workforce and then use our power over the dollar to buy things cheaply. Now, what happens to the dollar when we're no longer producing? It shrinks, it becomes worthless. And meanwhile, the people who are used to have jobs in the auto sector or steel or in construction, they're now working for less, or they're not working at all. They've been replaced by immigrants who will work cheaper. And so we're the victim of this outsourcing policy, which has produced huge fortunes for small numbers of people who have played the global free trade game to make their profits. But they still think that they can get the money from the U.S. population, which no longer has the money to pay for these things. And so, this is where I'm still convinced that one of the ways we can get at this is for people to understand what the Epstein class is all about. That it's not just about the sexual transgressions, which are pretty terrible, but that's just typifies the mentality of a ruling elite which thinks they're entitled to whatever they can grab and get away with. And, without being too religious, Jack, we know that what you sow, you shall reap. And we're seeing that. When your main product is pornography and drugs and video games, you destroy the minds of the people that are your population. And then you look at China and say, oh, look at China. They work so hard. They use slave labor. Well, they don't use slave labor anymore. They're now paying better wages. And their population is happy, and the standard of living of the middle class in China is overtaking our middle class. But here's where you have the problem. Who's going to tell people that? And who are they going to believe?
Well, as long as we're going to maintain China as the next enemy after Iran, maybe even more so than Russia, we still have to maintain these stories of the communist oppression, that the secret police is in every room of every Chinese citizen, that they can't come and go, when in fact the standard of living, as you've been saying, for some 850 million Chinese compared to 20 years ago is significantly improved. I've had two patients since the first of this year that have been to China for whatever reason, but mostly vacation orientation, come back with absolute surprise, and as to the level of the middle class and the quality of life there being so much different than what they were expecting. And I said, well, don't you think it's probably because you were not allowed to see the real Chinese person on the street with an empty stomach and the police with a gun to their head? And they just laughed at me. They said, no, it didn't matter where we went. It didn't matter where we went. And they were extremely friendly to us. They couldn't take better care of us in the sense of hospitality and friendliness and wanting to know more about America. And I said, what, the secret police weren't standing there to make sure you didn't talk? And they just laughed.
Well, Jack, what you're describing now is increasingly the America of the 21st century. You asked before, what are we producing? We're the leading country when it comes to new surveillance technologies. Artificial intelligence in the tech sector.
Yeah.
What are they working on? Well, Snowden told us this after 9/11 and after the Patriot Act and the various surveillance, the warrantless surveillance and that sort of stuff. I mean, look, we just had a bill go through that allows them to continue to do surveillance without a warrant. And the President of the United States, who spoke against it for many, many years, went to the Congress and said, well, we need this bill. Now, why is that? Because here's the secret that most of your listeners don't get. The people who are running this country into the ground are scared that your listeners are going to figure it out and wake up and rebel. And so that's why they're putting together this incredible new technology so that they can watch what you're doing through your phone, through your doorbell, through your car, computers in your car. And not only that, but one of the things about artificial intelligence is to figure out what it is you're going to do based on how they've programmed your thinking. And, when you talk about hybrid warfare, for example, one of the things that they've done is they started out by saying, how do we overcome fake news? Well, one of the ways they do it is through censorship, because they just determine the fake news is whatever goes against the narrative of the day of the establishment. So they have a way of debunking something after it comes out. Well, the people who are working on artificial intelligence came up with a better idea called pre-bunking. That is, how do you change the way people think so they won't need to be debunked? They'll never even consider the possibility of an alternative system or alternative idea. And if you can wire that into your computer technologies and your communication systems, you can control a population. And you don't even need to use guns and clubs and things of that sort. You reserve the right to use that if there are people who are resistors who are clever. But for the most part, you turn people into their own slave masters. That's what the whole point of an axiom is. You get people to believe something which is absolutely false, but they will fight to the death to keep that belief.
And when I see the protestations that are going on in various countries, especially in Europe, over the cost of living, over the cost of energy, over the incredibly low percentage approval rates regarding the big three, UK, France, and Germany, by their own citizens. And then I look here in this country, and I don't see anything like that at all. I don't see any protests about the increase in energy costs, or the food costs. Why is it that we are so much more sleepy here than the Europeans are, do you think? And you've been in Germany for a while now. I mean, you're a first-hand evidence of what I'm talking about.
Sure. Well, just in terms of the weakness of governments here, there was a really funny thing that happened this last weekend. In Germany, the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats have been the ruling parties for virtually the whole period since 1890. And sometimes one is in the government, sometimes the other. The Social Democrats are sort of moderate socialists, and the Christian Democrats are phony Christian conservatives. But they've had their way for many, many years. Now, all of a sudden, the Social Democrats are down to about 12% of the vote. The Christian Democrats, Merz's party, are down to around 20% popularity right now. And what's happened is that a movement, the Alternative for Deutschland, which is called a right-wing party, but which in some ways tries to mirror at least the language of Trump, if not some of the eccentricities. They're now the number one party, even though the media calls them neo-Nazis and right-wingers. And I, of course, looking for fights all the time, found that the people in the AFD are among the more serious thinkers. So they had a convention this weekend. They're now at about 30% in the whole country. But in parts of the eastern Germany, the former East German section, they're in the 40 to 45 to 50%. They may become the government soon in Saxony. They're already the government in Thuringia.
Well, isn't that the greater industrialized part of Germany in the east?
Well, it was, but the industrial sector in West Germany is around Dusseldorf, North Rhine-Westphalia, and that's the auto sector, which is being shut down.
Yeah.
And so they're going to start moving toward the Alternative for Deutschland. So the Antifa, the left-wing anarchist crazies, decided they were going to shut down the AFD convention this weekend in Erfurt. And so they mobilized to have 15,000 people show up at the convention center in Erfurt to block the entrances and keep the AFD from coming in. So the AFD did something very simple. They told all their members, get to the convention center by 5 in the morning.
Yeah.
Where there would be no demonstrations. So they all walked in, they were having breakfast, having talks, planning for the convention, and the Antifa shows up and starts gluing themselves to the streets, and they find there's no one coming in, and they're saying, what's going on here? They were outflanked.
You're already there.
Now, yeah.
Well, let me ask you this. The AFD, as they're gaining greater support of the people, how do they feel about the militarization, the draft, Pistorius's ideas of being ready for Russia for war by 29? What's the AFD's position in that?
Well, they're opposed to a war with Russia. They're opposed to the sanctions against Russia. They're opposed to German tax dollars going to the kleptocrats in Ukraine around Zelensky. They're also, the other issues they support, they're against the green agenda. They're for nuclear power. They're against the draft. But actually, they're not against the draft. They're against the draft at a time of war, which is actually a very sensible policy.
Oh, yeah.
And so they're getting support from young people now who previously thought they were the new Hitlers. Now, the other big issue for them is immigration. And some of them, I think, have a somewhat narrow view of that, which is that you kick all the immigrants out. And they seem to forget that the German population is getting older and older. And there are not that many young people around. But they also seem to forget that the reason there's so many immigrants is because the West is destroying these countries, like Syria, like Afghanistan. There are Syrian immigrants really pouring into Germany right now. And why is that? Because we funded a dirty war there. And we supported an ISIS Al-Qaeda network that overthrew the Assad government.
Well, Angela Merkel opened up the doors.
Yeah, that's right. It was Merkel who opened the doors. Now, listen to what Merz is proposing. Merz is saying we need to triple the defense budget so we can double the size of the Bundeswehr, the German army. And so they sent out registration forms to several million people who turned 18. And about 30% returned them. But only about 1.8% on the questionnaire that said that they would consider joining the army. How are you going to increase the size of the army when no one wants to fight a war? And no one wants to fight a war because they don't see why would Germany go to war with Russia? And Putin very cleverly last week said, look, we're willing to use the one pipeline that's still open of the Nord Stream pipeline to send oil and gas back to Germany. And the AfD endorsed that. So the AfD is fairly clever on these things. Now, there's one other issue where Merz may have finished his chancellorship. He's trying to save money on pensions. And so he wants to privatize the pension system. And they're even willing to offer a one-time small bonus if you opt out of the state pension system and go private. Now, what's the real truth here? Merits comes from BlackRock. BlackRock, of course, wants privatized pensions for themselves and their hedge fund buddies. And the German people know that. So they're not going to support that. So the AfD is now saying, stop spending on wars to save the pension system. So I think we're going to see a growth in support for the AfD, and the government waited too long to move in to kick them off the ballot and suppress them. So that's one potentially positive development. The other one, the kicking out of Starmer, they're going to bring in somebody who's even worse, this guy Burnham.
The one from South Birmingham.
Yeah.
Yeah.
His big thing is devolution. In other words, break up the central government and move the functions of government to small cities and villages, and let people run them locally. Now, that's an old strategy of creating internal conflict and also austerity. LaRouche used to say, well, you say to them, you can control your own garbage cans, as opposed to a real economic policy. So the truth about Europe, Jack, is that none of these governments have a clue what to do to regain the once relatively formidable engine of the economy, which was the German auto sector and then high tech in certain other countries. They're not doing that. And instead, they've become dependent on goods from China. Now they're saying we've got to go against China and cut off the Chinese goods, and they're finding they don't have the goods. Like the electric vehicle that Volkswagen bet everything on. Volkswagen has laid off 100,000 auto workers, and they're going to lay off 50,000 more because they bet on the electric vehicle. And all of a sudden they found out the Chinese are producing better electric vehicles for about 1/4 the cost.
Yeah.
So, and if they put a tariff on them, then people won't be able to afford them. So everything they're doing economically is crazy because it's dictated by a banking system that's going under, that has too much debt and no ideas of how to turn it around. Now, we still have time to turn it around in the United States, but not much time. And I think this is what caused Trump to change his policy on Iran and go with the memo of understanding, at least starting to go toward that, because of the effect of the oil and gas prices coming back to hit the U.S. with inflation. But it's not just inflation. How do you retire debt? In some cases, you go through a bankruptcy process, which means you write off some of the debt. But the way we've been doing it in the United States for the last 20 years is you write off the debt to the billionaires, but keep collecting it from the small businesses and mom and pop operations and families. And if you do it that way, you double strangle the productive sector and create more funny money that adds to the inflation. So on every single one of these issues, they're doing the wrong thing.
And they have as far as our country is concerned, they have the U.S. Congress to thank for that. You've heard the old sayings, best money Congress can buy and all this kind of stuff. And I remember when Hatch was running for his last time as senator from Utah, talking about it. I had him on the show as a guest back then. And it was pointed out by some conservative organization, I don't remember which was, the top 10 contributors to his reelection campaign did no business whatsoever inside the state of Utah. And, you look at the condition of our Congress now, as I said, a year ago, standing up with 54 standing ovations for Netanyahu. I think there was like 30-something for King Charles. And believing this nonsense from King Charles that America's concepts of a republic was the natural evolution of Republican ideas inside of a monarchy-controlled country of England, and how many people swallowed that crap, and which is
I think last time I was on with you, Jack, I raised the question of why someone didn't stand up and ask King Charles, why was it that we had a Declaration of Independence against you
yeah,
if we had the same policy?
yeah.
Who did we rebel against?
Well,
And again, see, that's this principle of paradox. The congressmen were too dim-witted or too fully bought to think about something like that. But it's a simple question. Now, here's another issue that I just want to get out before we finish today. There's this bill or this section of the National Defense Authorization Act. Every year we vote in an NDAA, and this year it's going up to about 1.2 trillion. But there's a section which is now called Section 219, which is essentially a merger of the U.S. military and the Israeli military.
yep.
And it's to integrate military planning, intelligence, technological development, procurement systems, surveillance systems, research capabilities. It's to essentially establish a unification between the U.S. and the Israeli military. And so far, the only people who have really been out front fighting it are Ro Khanna and Tom Massey. Now, Tucker and Marjorie Taylor Greene and others have spoken against it. Dennis Kucinich has put out some good material against it. But why is no one in the Congress asking the question, why do we need to integrate with Israel? What happened to the idea of a sovereign military representing our nation? No one even brings that up.
Oh, well, Israel's our greatest ally. Israel is dedicated to world freedom and justice as we are. Israel needs to be protected because of the same special relationship we got with the UK that we have with Israel now, that America stands with Israel because if Israel goes, America goes. Oh, brother.
Well, and in fact, you've pointed to something interesting, which is Israel, the UK, and the United States are joined in one particular area, the Epstein class. That's what is making the policy. And so here you have the president who has spoken often about moral values, and yet he's jumped into bed with the Epstein criminals. Now, here's the other thing that's important about this bill. We already have extraordinary integration with Israel and the United Kingdom when it comes to military defense. We saw this September 17th of last year when Trump was honored by King Charles at Windsor Castle, and they had a dinner, and it was all American AI and tech people and British AI and tech people. They signed $42 billion worth of contracts and agreed to $500 billion for the next 5 years in spending for joint projects. Now, if you look at the British Army, it's not exactly a powerful force. So what's the whole idea here? Now, here's how Netanyahu sold it. And this just, if anyone buys this, it just shows you how gullible the Americans have become. He said, I hear you complaining about giving $3.8 billion a year to Israel. I agree. We don't want your $3.8 billion. We want to draw that down and get rid of that. What he doesn't say is that if this bill passes, Israel will be locked in as a partner in $1.5 trillion of defense spending. And you put $3.8 billion up against $1.5 trillion, it's a much better deal for Israel. But why would we coordinate our policy with the greater Israel fanatics? And this brings me to one final point. Keep an eye on this. I've been told by very reliable people that Vance is being set up around the memo of understanding by putting him forward as the main person talking about negotiating with the Iranians. As soon as we go back to kinetic warfare against Iran, Vance is going to be pretty much drummed out. the person who would be brought in to replace him would be Marco Rubio. And Rubio was the one who went to Lebanon and got the deal signed between Israel and the puppet government of Lebanon to allow for Israel to stay in Lebanon against the memo of understanding that Trump signed, to fight against not just Hezbollah, but also against Lebanese Christians. And they're about to trigger a civil war. That's what Rubio is doing, and Vance was trying to stop it. So I think there may be an attempt to set up Vance, get rid of him, bring in Rubio, and then after the midterm elections, if the Democrats win, impeach Trump. And we'll end up with Rubio, who is much closer to the Bush networks, the neocon networks, the Zionist networks, the old CIA networks that were involved in the Bay of Pigs, for example. And that's something people should really keep their eye on, because Marco Rubio Trump was right about him in the 2016 campaign. Little Marco has no business running for president.
You mentioned the memorandum of understanding in the first two paragraphs. Lebanon is mentioned 3 times.
Yeah.
Israel has made it very, very clear they're not going to leave Lebanon. And Iran has made it very, very clear that you want to bring it on, because we're not going to have any MOU if you don't get out of Lebanon. So I'm kind of what? Did you say something,
Well,
Harvey?
that's exactly right.
Yeah, so I'm kind of expecting at any day for the whole thing to break out again. And I mean, I don't like thinking like that. When I look at the cards that I'm holding, whether they're playing cards or Pharaoh or whatever kind of predictive cards, whatever else, tarot or anything else, they've all got the picture of something far, far worse than we've seen up to this point in time. Because I think if this breaks out again, Iran is not going to hold back in any way whatsoever. That militarily, missile-wise, whatever, could spell the end of Israel, or at least bring Israel to the point where Netanyahu has no options left but nukes. And I try not to think that way. I try to think something else. I try to look at something more objective. I try to look at Trump finally stepping forward and say, all right, enough's enough. And the threat to stop all military aid, the threat of all financial aid, everything else to Israel until they pull out of Lebanon. And I believe that like I believe the moon's made out of cheese. But I try to be a man with a stable mind and try to be constructive and look for hope here and there. But I help me with this. Give me some rays of hope here that I'm looking at this all wrong.
No, first of all, you have to look at reality. If you try and kid yourself and pretend it's not as bad as it looks, you won't be able to follow through. But Jack, I know you have a certain amount of steel in your bones and cold water in your veins and an ability to face reality. And the fighter in you is the quality that's best in the American people. That you may have a certain cynicism, but underneath it, you're willing to fight for the principle of our republic, as stated in the beginning of the Declaration of Independence and then in the preamble of the Constitution. So what do we have to do? We've got to get as many of your listeners as possible to look up this Section 2019, 2019, and call the congressman and say, I don't support this. I don't want you to support it. And minimally, Mike Lee is someone who could stand up on this and join with others to oppose it. This is something that we're launching across the country. We have till July 13th, because They already tried to strike this from the National Defense Authorization Act, and the House Armed Services Committee knocked down the amendment that would have struck it. Tom Massey brought it forward with Ro Khanna. But there are growing numbers of people in the Congress who are beginning to say, do we really want to be in a situation where we're tied to Israel in future wars and tax dollars going to kill Palestinians, Palestinian youth, and Lebanese Christians, and so on? So if people think seriously about what it means to be an American, and it means that we treasure life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and wish that to everyone. But if necessary, we're prepared to fight to protect that. And this is one of those issues that will enable us to do that. And so if we can beat this, it will send a signal, just like some of the AIPAC candidates are losing elections in Colorado, in New York City, in I think in Mississippi. The biggest supporters of the Israel lobby have taken it on the chin. So Americans can act intelligently and forcefully.
Well,
they need the information.
With that,
if anybody wants to get more details on this, I'm going to be writing something up today that will be on the LaRouche Organization website in the next couple of days. The update I did today, which is also available, the audio video update of 12 minutes, is available at thelaroucheorganization.com. And people can use that to share that with others and mobilize like hell to defeat this amendment, this Section 2019.
okay,
That may be a starting point.
real quick for a moment, talking about the defeat of some AIPAC people, how much ground gaining has Diane Sare made in her candidacy for President of the United States?
Well, it's interesting. There are many people who are starting to come around. For example, Douglas McGregor. You know him, right?
Oh, yeah.
McGregor has said, well, he doesn't endorse candidates, but if he did, he would endorse Diane for president. Scott Ritter said the same thing. We're beginning to make a headway among certain military and intelligence professionals. But our organization is not as large as it once was. You know, we've been brutalized by attacks over the years. But what's interesting is that the memories of LaRouche are still quite strong in many places. One of those places is Salt Lake City, where because of our association with you, we've had constant meetings, appearances on radio over the years. And if you talk to people, you'll find there are people who say, oh yeah, I used to support LaRouche, or my father used to tell me about LaRouche. We have to figure out as creative ways as possible to bring those people into some form of active participation in a movement. I don't care if they call themselves pro-LaRouche. We need a movement which is pro-American and a mission of bringing our country together around the founding principles. So, Diane is doing an excellent job. Jose Vega is doing an excellent job. I wish I could say there was more evidence that we're making progress, but I see it every day. I have more interviews than I've ever had before. People want to hear what I have to say as a spokesman for LaRouche.
Yeah, I heard you on Al Jazeera here not too long ago.
Yeah. Al Mayadeen, which is in Beirut.
And Al Mayadeen.
I'm off and on with Dr. Marandi, who
yes.
I have great respect for.
Oh, me too. He's one of my heroes. I could get in trouble for saying that, but he's one of my heroes, as you are, Harley, because it's...
Marandi's a courageous guy, Jack. His security staff takes his cell phone away from him every time he leaves the bunker, so he won't get tracked by an Israeli bomb. Israeli drone.
Yeah.
But he's quite an extraordinary guy. And I think there are more people like him in Iran that we just don't know. What Marandi said is, I have nothing against America. I just don't like what your government is doing on behalf of the Zionist lobby.
I've heard some other reports from some of the Iranian leaders either Grachi or Pazeskian, or I can't remember exactly, saying we have nothing against the American people. It's your leaders. It's your leaders. Wake up. It's your leaders that are the problem. Well, that's the same. I mean, you could say that with almost every European nation or any southern
Sure.
Indochina nation. I mean, it's always who is it that's going to make it to the top in the leadership of these countries, but those who support and reinforce the control of the international banking cartels and those
Yep.
as they're approaching trillionaire status oligarchs now, which is the enemy of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We're coming to the end
They're on the
here.
edge of they're on the edge of a cliff right now, Jack,
Yeah.
because they cannot figure out how to get popular support for bailouts. And if people understood that they're in worse shape than you are when you're trying to figure out how to pay your mortgage, then we would have more people who would start looking at these economic solutions of LaRouche and going with them.
All right, my friend. That's it for another Monday.
All right, good talking with you, Jack, and hello to everyone in Utah.
You'll have to hang up first because if I hang up, I separate myself from the radio station.
Okay.
All right, Harley. Bye-bye. And I will try to get him back on again here before too much longer. About a minute to go. And I hope this has been as beneficial for you as it was for me to be able to talk to that kind of an intelligence and stimulator of my thinking that Harley certainly is. I'll be back tomorrow again at the same time. I want to talk a little bit about the concept of the July 4th and what the Declaration represents in the sense of the first time anybody came out and created a government that exists only through the consent of the governed as opposed to all the monarchies that fed into it. All right, I do have, I think, 2 spots this week that's still open for a new patient. And I just had 2 people come in from Southern California the other day, and I already getting good positive feedback from them. All right, that's it. We're coming up to the top of the hour. I'm going to stop the recording and save it at KTalk, and I'm going to end the stream. For those of you who are a part of the program, like, subscribe, whatever we got to do to increase that number.